I play a little guitar myself.
Really?
Uh-huh.
That's great.
Yeah.
What kind of music do you play?
Well, like acoustic, folksy stuff, you know, but right now I'm working on a couple Iron Maiden covers.
What you just heard is the opening riff to The Trooper, a classic staple song from British heavy metal band Iron Maiden. Side note, even though I recorded this particular cover, I still got copyright flagged for using the original drum track in one of my earlier test uploads. So unfortunately, that's going to be the extent of the Iron Maiden music featured in this video. Anyway, I don't think I should even bother explaining who Iron Maiden is. If you've had even the slightest exposure to heavy metal or rock music, then you should know who they are. Similar to other legends like Judas Priest, Def Leppard, and Motorhead, Iron Maiden is one of the quintessential bands to come out of the new wave of British heavy metal movement of the late 70s and early 80s. Now let's fast forward to how this becomes relevant to what we do here at Game & Browse. The turn of the century was an interesting time for some classic bands and their marketing approach. Video games were booming, thanks to the surging return of arcades and the popularity of home consoles from companies like Nintendo and Sega. As is expected, some artists ended up crossing over into the gaming market to help promote themselves, or in some cases, express a new creative outlet. Aerosmith was featured in the rail shooter game Revolution X, Motley Crue had a pinball game called Crue Ball, Kiss also had a pinball game, and even a bizarre first-person shooter game called Kiss Psycho Circus: The Nightmare Child. Even lesser-known acts like the Thompson Twins somehow had a game on the ZX Spectrum and the Commodore 64. But that particular game is an especially bizarre case, one we might even have to revisit in the future. But for now,
put them in the Iron Maiden.
Iron Maiden? Excellent!
Execute them.
Bogus.
In 1999, the members of Iron Maiden began preparation for their Ed Hunter concert tour. This tour is noted as being a landmark for the band, as it marked the return of longtime guitarist Adrian Smith and beloved frontman Bruce Dickinson. The tour ran for 31 shows, with 3 of the shows being canceled due to guitarist Dave Murray's broken pinky. Accompanying the tour came the release of this interesting little package here. Ed Hunter is a multi-disc set, first and foremost being a greatest hits compilation album voted on by the fans at IronMaiden.com. This is a very solid compendium of tunes, but it's the same as any other compilation album in the world. Nothing super out of the ordinary, other than featuring a special re-recording of the track Wrathchild with Bruce Dickinson on vocals instead of the original vocalist, Paul Di'Anno.
the most interesting thing about Ed Hunter appears here in the back of the multi-disc set with disc number 3. Ed Hunter is also the name of a strange and intriguing rail shooter game that takes the player through some of the famous cover art from the Iron Maiden discography. The manual unravels a rather long and verbose story, but to summarize it, Ed Hunter is actually the player character. You're a self-described former roadie, freelance journalist, and maverick investigator. The game starts when you're given an envelope full of money from an unknown source and asked to rescue Iron Maiden's mascot, Eddie the Head, from an asylum and follow him to the ends of the earth. And why not, right? I mean, I get that it's an envelope of money, but being asked to free someone from a mental institution? That had better come with a lot more money, an autographed photo of Steve Harris, and probably a new car for starters. Because Ed Hunter is ultimately a game, you accept this strange and mysterious quest, and after a short CGI sequence, hit the streets of London, which is like stepping into a virtual version of the band's eponymous debut album, Iron Maiden, as well as their second album, Killers. This design choice is actually very fascinating, if I'm to be completely honest. I like the idea of stepping into the story that lurks behind an album's cover imagery. It's like Super Mario 64 for Maiden fans. Anyway, you start blasting away goons outside of important venues to Iron Maiden's early days, like the Cart and Horses pub and the Ruskin Arms.
As As mentioned, the gameplay style can be described as a rail shooter with shooting gallery elements sprinkled in. Each sequence starts with enemies cropping up on the screen and tossing items at you. Your goal is to blast the enemies away before they start throwing these projectiles. The projectiles can be shot out of the way by aiming at and clicking on them. Once you clear a whole section of the screen, the game will refocus onto a new area of the screen and new foes will begin to pop out. Once again, you're tasked with staying alive and taking down all of the enemies.
Eventually, the sequence as a whole will finish, and you will be moved to a new area with new projectiles to dodge and new enemies to shoot and defeat. Ad nauseum. Not exactly riveting gameplay, but for a rail shooter, it could be worse. There are also a few times in the game where you can choose the path to traverse. It's mostly moot though, as eventually you'll need to rejoin the main path to continue your progress and find Eddie. Given the repetitive nature of the game, now is a good time to mention the soundtrack. Obviously, it features songs from the Ed Hunter's Greatest Hits compilation featured on the other discs in the set.
That's good.
The bad news is they loop.
That's bad.
Sometimes that isn't that bad whenever you're listening to a longer song like Phantom of the Opera or Hallowed Be Thy Name,
That's good.
but when you're listening to something shorter like Wrathchild or Futureal, it's borderline torture.
Can I go now?
And to be honest, even the long ones become irritating after a while. Don't get me wrong, I'm a huge fan of heavy metal, and I've been to a ton of metal concerts. But hearing the same song anywhere between 3 to 6 times in the time it takes to pass a stage gets draining. Now you can change the songs in the menu if you don't want to hear a certain song on your next playthrough, but it's just still going to be a loop of whatever song you selected. So eventually you will face burnout.
Now, back to the game. After you reach the end of London's level and 22 Acacia Avenue, you're sent to Shady Pines Asylum, which is a reference to the album Peace of Mind. At this point in the game, you're introduced to new weapons that you can obtain if you shoot them when they appear on the screen. This is similar to the way power-ups are obtained in one of my favorite franchises, The House of the Dead. Unlike your handgun, however, these special weapons have limited ammunition, and once you use up all of the rounds, you're back to using the pistol. Just like London, Shady Pines Asylum has baddies lobbing junk at your character. In this case, it's lunatics and doctors hurling teddy bears and vials of what I assume is Ecto-Cooler, or some other refreshing green beverage.
Other than a skin swap and a fresh coat of new paint on the level, this is virtually nothing new. And here is where the game starts to drag on a bit. You spend forever in this lobby area, and I found myself actually zoning in and out multiple times during this sequence. This section here really showcases the big issue that I have with Ed Hunter. This game is too long and too repetitive, even with an average playtime of just about 2 hours. Each level should have been no longer than 5 to 8 minutes, i.e. the average duration of an Iron Maiden track to keep things at a more upbeat pace. Speaking of potential ways to spruce up the gameplay, Ed Hunter happens to support a variety of different control methods. The Microsoft Sidewinder joystick might help you obtain a sort of arcade feel with the game, or you could go even further with the Act Labs PC Light Gun for that truly authentic House of the Dead look and feel. Unfortunately, we're not a large channel, and we're not paid to produce these videos, so spending money seems a little frivolous for a single video, especially in the case of the Act Labs PC Light Gun, which is a bit more expensive and more difficult to track down. So point and click will suffice for us.
After rescuing Eddie from the asylum, the floor drops out below you and both characters fall into hell, which attempts to emulate the cover from The Number of the Beast. The game also introduces a mini-boss in the form of the devil. There is a bit of an issue with this boss fight, however. Without any sort of damage indicator or health bar, it's hard to really gauge how effective any of your attacks are. The devil floats around and spawns enemies while eating a buffet of bullets that rivals Willem Dafoe in Platoon, and ultimately just keeps on floating around until he presumably gets bored? Eventually, he'll go invincible and fly off the screen until your next encounter with him later on in the level. So, if you're expecting any sort of payoff, there isn't one. You don't get to truly defeat him. Sorry, this isn't a Striper game. You don't get to say to hell with the devil here. Much to Michael Sweet's dismay.
After escaping hell, you come back from the grave with Eddie, mimicking the album cover Live After Death. And then the game becomes a straight-up zombie shooter. The game frequently gives you shotguns to help keep you stocked up and ready for action. This sequence is fairly fun, but it does go on a bit longer than it probably should. Your character shuffles around the graveyard until eventually you pass the cemetery gates, and get warped through time and space to become part of Iron Maiden's best album, Power Slave, which is not up for debate in the comments, by the way, because you're wrong. I wish I could say the level was as good as the album, though.
Aside from the cool cinematics, the whole Power Slave level is stuck inside a generic pyramid with lackluster enemies. The mummies take multiple hits, and they have second wins after their deaths. And there are also some tricky snakes and scorpions to tackle as well. Ugh, no, not those scorpions. Stop it.
This is also unfortunately where the difficulty really ended up getting me, to the point where I had to resort to cheating. Ed Hunter can be a bit relentless, and unless you're good at snagging up extra lives from the various band member heads in each of the levels, you'll constantly find yourself fighting uphill. So I'm just going to award myself this and turn to the internet for help. Thankfully, the World Wide Web has footage of other people beating the game out there on YouTube, so I'd like to give a big thanks to Zypho for the footage of these final levels. His long play can be found in the description of the video if you wish to watch it all the way through.
After you go all Brendan Fraser on the mummies, you'll be transported to an exhibit on ancient Egypt in a distant and far-off future. This cyberpunk universe is inspired by none other than one of Maiden's coolest album covers, Somewhere in Time. This level has you fighting through a neon and graffiti-riddled Blade Runner future, where you fight these doofy-looking guys and some buxom green women. Eventually, you'll gun your way back into the future version of the Ruskin Arms, which, funny enough, is permanently closed in the actual future. And, would you look at the time? You sneaky developers.
At the end of this level, Eddie starts up some scraps left over from the DeLorean, and it's onwards to the final level, which is a complete dystopian future. Everything is virtually destroyed, and the world is now completely inhabited by mutants. To be honest, this part of Ed Hunter really feels like an afterthought. Perhaps this can be blamed on the fact that this particular stage is the only one not explicitly modeled after an Iron Maiden album cover, but the levels are so forgettable and blandly textured that it might as well be Virtual 11. It's quite possible that the game designers struggled with the art direction here, but it's whatever. Once you slog through this section, you finally gain access to the roof, and the final boss. Or bosses, I suppose. It's the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. Because in typical Iron Maiden fashion, this choice falls right in line with the band's love of mythological and religious imagery. Right off the bat, you see how powerful the Horsemen are whenever they're able to strike down even Eddie and toss him off the roof, leaving the player to fight the Horsemen alone. After a few minutes of maintaining a tenacious defense against the attacks, you will soon be able to shoot them down once and for all, saving the world in the process. Even though that's kind of irrelevant since the whole world is already destroyed at this point.
We did it, Patrick! We saved the city!
After the final fight, a cutscene is triggered and Cyber Eddie steps out of a portal to send the player somewhere back in time, flashing through all the levels one last time before showing you your final score.
And that's pretty much it for Ed Hunter. The game also features a two-player mode where you can take turns and try to rack up a higher score than your friend. This is similar to Super Mario Bros. And its competitive two-player mode. For the standard point-and-click shooting mode, it's pretty boring. But if you actually have a joystick or a light gun, I could see this being pretty cool to trade off with a friend on, especially if you both enjoy Iron Maiden's music. Just be sure to mute the game and put on your own Iron Maiden mix. That way you're not stuck in any endless song loops.
If the lore and story of Ed Hunter intrigues you, then you might be interested in learning more about Melt, which was another Iron Maiden-related title that was set to appear on the Sony PlayStation and Windows 95 compatible PCs. Melt actually sounds really advanced if you believe some of the marketing fluff pieces, which likely means that it was going to be hot garbage. I mean, come on, there was no way that they were going to ever reasonably deliver on a title like this in the late 1990s. As expected, the game was cancelled, with the band stating, "It was crap. Maiden wants to give their fans something to blow them away. The new one will." This led to the production of Ed Hunter, which really isn't a good game either, but I digress. Since producing Ed Hunter, Iron Maiden has left behind experimental interactive media for the most part. However, they did recently launch a turn-based RPG game called Iron Maiden Legacy of the Beast, which was once again paired alongside a concert tour. Similar to the Ed Hunter tour, this tour has also seen some cancellations, this time due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic instead of an injury. I'm not diving into this one too much because I don't really care for mobile games, but from what I've seen from reviews, fans are enjoying it, so maybe give it a look if you're an Iron Maiden fan looking for a new game to play. I'll put a link to the game in the description below. And finally, for an obscure game, Ed Hunter isn't super expensive. So if this video intrigues you enough, you can visit the eBay link in the video description, and that way you too can up the irons with Eddie in this unique piece of Iron Maiden history. As always, thanks for watching.